To do our turned edge applique, we are going to use a method that utilizes a very thin, non-fusible interfacing. You could replace this interfacing with a piece of fabric that is the same color as the background fabric that you used for your embroidery, or you can do the actual needle turn applique if that's your preferred method. But for our purposes here, I'm just going to show you how to use the interfacing. To begin, the first thing that you're going to need to do is to trim away the excess felt on the outside. When we go to turn under the edges of our fabric, we don't want to have a lot of extra bulk. So we want to cut down our felt and so that it is the same size or just to the inside of our traced line from our pattern. So I'm going to show you a quick way to create a line for yourself to follow as you go to cut out your felt. So my first tip is, if you haven't already done this, that perhaps wait a day or two. Make sure that you take your embroidery out of your hoop and let it relax for a little bit. This will let the creases kind of disappear on your felt and also on the fabric on the front side, because you want to be able to create a new crease and not confuse yourself. But either way, I just took this out of the hoop today. It totally works. You can do it just fine. Okay, so the first suggestion that I have is to pull back your felt. I'm going to turn this so that I can see the top of it. And I'm going to bring my felt just to the edge of my drawn line. And then I'm going to use my finger and I'm going to crease it a little bit. And I'm just going to keep working my way around, creasing it so that I want to make sure that my felt is just inside that traced line. So once I've done that, you can see that now I have an outline that goes all the way around, and then I can just take a nice sharp pair of scissors and I'm going to follow that line all the way around, and then I will end up with my felt looking a little bit like this. Now there's a couple of places I may come back and trim a little bit more over here just to make sure that I have reduced any bulk. But you also want to try to get it as close to that line as you can, because you don't want to have any dips in it and stuff when you go to applique it to the front of your mini quilt. So, you know, there's a little bit of play in there. And again, we are not striving for perfection. We want to enjoy this process. So don't let it drive you crazy. Just do the best you can and it will all be great. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to take your interfacing, and I'm just going to place it on the front of here. Now I have cut mine generously. I want to make sure that I have plenty of space where my felt is, and I can kind of feel the ridge of my felt around here. So I want to make sure it extends beyond my felt. In fact, I might turn this a little the other way so I have a little extra on those sides. The flat bottom, the flat part at the bottom of our embroidery, we're not as worried about because that will get trimmed up later. Okay, so I'm just gonna put it over the top of my embroidery. It doesn't have to be perfectly perfect. And then I'm going to flip that piece over. I'm gonna take it to my sewing machine and I'm gonna sew right around my drawn line. So this is where being able to see that line is helpful, removing the felt so you can see that line. So you want to just start at the base here, go all the way around, and end again here where it hits that straight edge. I do like to back stitch on both sides here to make sure that those stitches stay put. And then once that's sewn, we'll show you the next step. Okay, once you've sewn all the way around, and I should note that it's a good idea to attach your interfacing using some pins along the outside that you can see. So you'll place it on the front of it, flip it over, and then pin it so that it doesn't shift around as much when you stitch. And then you're gonna sew all the way around right on your drawn line, again, back stitching where you start and stop. The next thing we need to do is trim away all our extra fabric. And because this is just one big curve, and we want it to be able to sit nicely, we're going to need to put notches into our seam allowance. So you can either do this by using a pair of scissors and trimming it to a scant 1/4 of an inch all the way around, and then adding notches in as you go. Or my favorite method is to just use pinking shears. And I will just take my shears and I will come right up to the edge of my stitches without going through. So you want to get as close as you're comfortable, but you really don't want to risk snipping those threads. So give yourself a little bit of space, and you're just going to go around the entire thing, cutting away your extra fabric and interfacing, and using your pinking shears to give you a nice edge here that is going to remove a lot of the bulk of the fabric and allow for a nice crisp look to your curve. And then what you'll do is you're going to take between your interfacing and your fabric, and that is where you're going to turn it right side out. So I'm not going to do this all the way here because I still need to finish trimming this. But you're going to turn between your interfacing and your fabric, and then you're going to take it to your pressing surface, to your ironing board, and you're going to press under that seam allowance so that you have a nice rounded edge to your applique. Now, when you're at your ironing board, you want to make sure that you aren't smashing down your stitches here. So I recommend really just pressing right around the edges. If you do have wrinkles or things in the center of your embroidery that you feel like you need to stitch, what I suggest is using either some natural fiber batting or like a nice bath towel and putting that fluffy, fibrous thing, whether it's your towel or your batting, on your surface, on your pressing surface, and then put your embroidery right side down, and then you'll put a press cloth over here because we have our interfacing and we don't want to melt it. Then you'll put a press cloth on it and then press it so that you're not smashing down your embroidery as much as possible, because you really want that raised look to it. So avoid pressing around your stitches if at all possible, and if not, really try to buffer those stitches with some batting or a nice fluffy bath towel or something. Okay, so now I have it turned. Now, if you're finding that it's a little bit challenging to turn that seam all the way, I recommend using something like a bone folder or a turning tool, something that has a kind of a pointy but not sharp edge to it that you can really get in those seams, and it'll help you push it out nice and round and even as you can. Now you'll notice that I've left quite a bit of extra fabric here on the bottom. And that's just to give me a little bit of play as I go to place this onto my mini quilt where the rays go. So here I have my rays. They are all appliqued on. I have my backing fabric, my batting, and all of my rays are stitched down. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my applique over the top of that opening that we've left. Now I want my the edges of my curve here to kind of line up with my straight edge across here. And then I want to just double check and make sure that I am covering all of the seams of where my rays have ended. So this is where trimming it just inside of that traced line is helpful. So make sure, but if I need to adjust it or slide it one way or the other, I have just a little bit of play in there, and that's kind of why I leave this long bit too. Because if I need to kind of fudge it up a little bit, I have a 1/4 inch seam allowance here that I can kind of play around with this in if I need to adjust it, if I have a little edge of a seam poking out underneath there. So then what I'll do, once I am happy with how it's placed, you kind of want to make sure that your letters are perpendicular to, or, you know, parallel with your horizon line here so that it's not, you know, kind of crooked like that. So you're going to position it how you like it and then pin it in place, and then you can stitch it down. I do 1 row of stitching really close to the edge using an edge stitch. And then I like to add a couple of extra rows of stitching just around the outside, but I usually leave the inside nice and fluffy, but you could also go in and do some free motion quilting in and around your letters, and it would give even more of a raised look to your applique or to your embroidery on here if that's a look that you would like. So make sure you do 1 nice edge stitch all the way around to hold it in place, and then you're going to want to add at least 1 more row of quilting here to hold your sundown. And if you want to do even more in between your letters or however you like, add the quilting, and then we're ready to get going on our applique letters and finishing up our Rainbow Sunshine mini quilt.